What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Fight Within podcast. Today's guest is podcast agent Frannie Foltz, and
Yes.
we actually met online, which is crazy. We're part of a Christian entrepreneur group, and she reached out, and I decided to answer, and so here we are now. And so I really wanted to have you on because I think it's extremely unique what you do. There's not a lot of people doing it. There's not a lot of people that are as excited as you are about it and have the energy that you do. And so why do this now? Like, what did you see something in the market and say, hey, I want to go explore that world, or why are you doing this now? And how'd you grow a passion for it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited. I watched many of the videos on your YouTube, and I'm like so humbled that I get to be, some of these people that you've interviewed are big time people. So I'm super honored
Yeah.
to be here and, just knowing that you've got great following too. So thank you for that. Manny, it's funny because I hate to say I fell into it. But really it was one of those things. I've always been a super connector. My friends for years have called me the queen connector, like whether it was, hey, I need a plumber, or where do I go get my hair
Mm-hmm.
done? Or, hey, do you know somebody who could help me with my CRM? I've always been that person, a mover and shaker. And so from the time I was really young, and it's just one of those things that, again, and hopefully it's okay that I share a little bit about my faith.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I do believe that God gives you giftings and talents that you could certainly, that you can use and manifest in so many different ways. And so knowing that I've always been a connector and I've always had just a love of edifying other people, that's one of my spiritual giftings. I get to do that through podcasting.
Yeah.
Also podcasts, I don't know if you know, but since COVID, there have been millions of downloads, extra downloads, because people have time to be listening to them.
Sure.
And more podcasts are literally popping up by the day. So podcasting is not going anywhere. So it's certainly a market and a niche market, because there's, a Spider-Man podcast. Like there's so many
Yeah.
specific
Yeah.
podcasts. So the sky is the limit. So I do a lot of concierge services though, where I only like to work with, people who are Christian solopreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, that's my space. And so I get to get really dialed in, and then I learn all about them and their stories so I can be their cheerleaders, because it's hard to pitch yourself when you go on and say like, hey, with you, I was able to be like, hey, by the way, I came to you for a client, but like, I also have a story if you want to hear about it, kind of
Yeah.
wanted to, but it's hard to do that a lot of times, to just throw it out there to people and say, hey, I'm really great, and this is what I've done, and would you like me to have you on your show,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think it's definitely tough, but in that regard, just from your experiences, what sets a podcast apart? Because like you said, there's so many podcasts out there, and there's Spider-Man. There's literally like, oh, let's work. It's like a book club now, and we're gonna
right.
start a book club as a podcast, and we're gonna talk about things, which is great because I think there's audiences for everything. But what in your mind sets a podcast apart from another podcast?
That's a great question too, because really what I do is I look for my client and find
Mhm.
where their audience members are hiding, if you will.
Okay.
So I look and see how many subscribers, a podcast has. I
Hmm.
look and see what their demographic is. I listen to some podcasts to kind of get an idea.
Sure.
Most of the people I work with are, like I said, solopreneurs who are mostly business people, coaches, and authors and things.
Yeah.
So I look to find somebody. One of my clients is he's a leadership trainer who's a former CEO. So he's going to be going for a very different audience because he wants to eventually land speaking gigs and sell his book.
Hmm.
So for him, it's very different. So what sets podcasts apart are really their audience who listens to them,
Mm.
and then the content that they're providing. Obviously you can have 500 different business podcasts, which is one of the top podcast genres, if you will. And so, but you can have so many of them, but a Gary Vee fan is going to be very different than a John Maxwell, right? Like their audience
Yeah.
is going to be
Yeah.
very different. And so you have to know who is your client. Like for me, I need to know who's my client to be able to get them in
Hmm.
front of the right people. So that's how I kind of differentiate.
What kind of struggles have you had to deal with in specifically in booking your client? Because a lot of times, like when I try to book guests or I try to talk to guests, sometimes I'm shooting for the stars and I'm just going after everyone. But at the same token, like you said, I want to have guests that are local or that are starting out, because I feel like more people can relate to that story and it's a little bit more real. I feel
Yes.
like if people have some big time celebrity, it's like not everyone's gonna have their accomplishments or do the things that they did, and so there's no sort of connection there.
Right. Well, two things. I do want to piggyback on the initial question you asked me, which was like,
Mm-hmm.
how did I fall into this? So I was a teacher and an administrator in a school for
Okay.
many years, from 1997 till 2017.
Oh
And then
wow.
I was working in corporate, and I lost my job in February of this year, 2020. So when you're listening to this, that's the great thing about podcasts too, Manny, is that podcasts live for so long. Like they're not going
Yeah.
to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Somebody can listen to this in 2025 and be like, wow. But just in case it's a back to the future moment for those of you who are listening in 2025, this is 2020, but I lost my job in February. And then I was like, what's next? And there's that commercial, that Allstate commercial where the little girl, 16-year-old girl comes out and she's like,
Yeah.
my car. And she's so excited, her brand new car. And then the guy comes out and he's a business guy and he sees his car getting towed. And he's like, my car. It's kind of like the exact same words, but the scenario is completely differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw this as like, what's next? Like, how exciting. And so I thought, you know what? I'm a really good writer, so I can write pitches really well. And I'm really good at connecting people, and I'm really good at encouraging. Like, I'm going to kind of do this PR area. And then it became so dialed into the podcast. I mean, as you know, like your niche makes you rich, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really how I dialed into that. So the next question then you asked me, like moving forward into sorry, I lost my train of thought there because I got so excited about the Spider-Man and like kind of thinking all about that. Oh, how do you like kind of pitch somebody and aiming
Well,
high?
yeah. How do you pitch, and what some struggles that you found when you were booking your clients?
The challenge is not always getting into the inbox. In the very beginning, like I would hear crickets,
Yeah.
and so until I learned how to repitch, and like there's actually an app that you can have, or there's
Yeah.
software you can have that you can find out if somebody opens your email. So I was like, oh, let me see if people are actually opening my email. And if they're not opening it, then I'm going to send another pitch with maybe a different subject line. So
Mm-hmm.
making sure that you can get into the inbox. So the good thing is now, like I've got enough relationship with a couple hundred different podcasters and their producers that I've been able to kind of bypass and get to the front of the line. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I've got a client I'm looking for. Here's what, some titles that they might talk about. So, but I think that's probably the hardest. If somebody in your audience is wanting to do their own pitching, it can be done. It is an art and a science, though. I will be
Oh
honest.
yeah.
Like, you have to learn, the art of it and finessing it. But then there's a numbers game that goes with it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I agree. But go backtracking a little bit. How'd you make the transition from being a teacher and being in administration to going into the corporate world? Like, why did you? Was it something that was forced on you, or why did you decide to make that leap?
That's an all God moment, right? Like I've always had a side hustle. I wrote a little book, and I'm happy to do a giveaway with your audience, but I wrote a book about how I've always had a side hustle since I was like 12 years old. And I just always had this opportunity, always had this little fire in me. But I wrote a little ebook when I got let go in February, and it's called From Your Fire to That Girl's on Fire. And I talk about the importance of having that little something extra you're always doing on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And with that being said, like I've always been an organizer, I've always been a project manager of some sorts. And it was a God moment that I was at my school. I was an administrator, and I met somebody who was the founder and owner of an 8-figure company based in California.
Wow.
And she propositioned me, not in a bad way, but she was like, you have like your executive functioning is so solid, your
Mm-hmm.
attention to detail. She had worked with me in the capacity of admissions and said, I want you to come work for me in my company. So it was a wonderful opportunity. So it was literally God served it to me on a plate, so I didn't really go looking for it. It kind of came looking for me, which, you know, TD Jakes has a really great expression, Manny, and he says, I don't know if you know Pastor TD Jakes,
Yeah.
but he's
Yeah.
in the Potter's house. And he says, that your current vocation is oftentimes the transportation to your final destination.
Mm,
And I think about that so often because I feel like so many people feel like, our parents, I don't know how old you are, but, the generation above us,
yeah.
they stayed in a job for 20 to 25 years.
Yeah.
And it's not like that. And your children, I don't have children, I've never been married. They'll never see that. They'll change jobs every 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so if you're in a place where, you're questioning and wondering, like, do I pivot? Yeah. God might say your time is up. Like it's a revolving door. Keep on going, but you'll know, or some opportunity will present itself.
Is there, talk about a little bit of the emotional letdown when it comes to that, because here you have a company that is pursuing you, and is a little bit almost on the opposite side of the spectrum of what you're used to and what you've been doing for close to 20 years,
Yes.
and then they let you go. And it's not to say that you're not good enough or you weren't performing or anything like that. Whatever the circumstances are, they let you go. How does that, how do you deal with that? And how do you deal with that battle emotionally?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think that it relates to the core of our human being is to want to be accepted. We don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be rejected. And I think especially because it was on their terms, the company
Mm-hmm.
was restructuring. It wasn't like I was, performing poorly or anything like that. The company just
Yeah.
they let several of us go. But still, I wanted to be on my terms if I left. So there was a hit to your pride, initially.
Sure.
And then I just was like, I mean, again, being a faith-based person, I was like, Lord, like, I know your word tells me that you have plans for me. And I know that this was an experience for me. It gave me a lot of opportunities to learn and to grow. And so I had severance for 6 weeks. And during that time, like I said, I wrote a book. During that time, I was like, I'm not letting the grass grow under my feet. Like, what can I do with this? If I'm getting paid right now, how can I maximize this time? And I set myself goals. But the emotional side of it, Manny, I will tell you, like, it takes a hit on your ego, and
Mm-hmm.
it kind of gets to your core of like, why not me? And
Yeah.
especially as I mentioned a minute ago, I'm single and I've never been married. So rejection and fear and commitment has been an issue for me. So it really got into like the enemy really, he knows that rejection is a part of the fiber of my being. So it was like, you're not good enough. Like, look, they didn't want you. Like, you weren't one of the ones they kept. So it definitely required a lot of prayer. I fasted during that time. I did a lot of biblical practices because I knew I had to anchor myself in something that was stronger than my own willpower at that time.
Yeah, no, that was my follow-up question, was what did you do specifically? Like, what exactly did you do? And go in a detail, if you would,
Yeah.
to overcome that, because a lot of people, we're very fortunate that we have our faith.
Yes.
A lot of people don't, and people will turn to different substances or different tools
Vices, right.
um, to overcome that. So what did you do specifically when you were going through that?
Such a great question. I wish that there was like one little formula, but
Mm-hmm.
I talk about my book is called, as I mentioned, From Your Fire to That Girl's on Fire. And I give 7 practical tips. And I sat down on the airplane that day and I was like, okay, what are the things, like if I'm going to pivot, I'm 44 again, 2020. I'm like, I still have 20 years of my life, roughly left in the workforce. I'm like, what are the things that light me up? And I literally took out a pen and a paper, and on the airplane, I just started
Mm-hmm.
scribbling it away, because there are a lot of things that steal your joy and zap your energy, and there are things that just light you up. And like being on these, talking to you and getting to know you, and before we hopped on, like I was like, tell me about your tattoos. Like I love hearing people's stories, and I was
Yeah.
like, I want to do something that I get to find out about people's stories. So that was really where it was. And when you're doing a podcast, as you know, like you have a remarkable story, right? And so you get to find out about that. So I just started like figuring out, that was the first thing, was I wrote down the things that I've done in the past and that, have lit me up, and then the things that have stolen my joy. And then I started, well, what are the things that I'm trained in classically, right? But again, when you are a faith-based person, you recognize that God will equip the called, right? You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
worry 100%. You don't need a degree. That's a self-esteem or insecurity issue. You'll get the skills and the tools if you have the energy and the ambition to do it. So with that being said, I literally was just like, what have I learned over the years? What are some of my skill sets? What reasons why people call me? And I just started like honing it. And I had pages and pages. And then I was like, who are mentors in these areas that I would go to? And I started literally booking phone calls with people. Hey, can you talk to me? I love. And that's how my first client came. My
Mm-hmm.
last day of my job was February 10th. I signed my first contract with a 5-figure client that same week before Valentine's Day.
That's awesome.
So it
But
was a God thing, where I was like, I'm just going to start hustling.
yeah, but what did you do that because you were forced to? Because I feel like you're already, uber energetic and uber focused. But what kind of advice or tips would you give to an entrepreneur that keeps having a failing business, or someone that hasn't even started because they're scared and they're saying, no, I gotta have, $10,000 saved up. I gotta find the perfect office space. I gotta find partners, and they have this whole plan
Right.
set up, when a lot of times they should just go. Because
Yeah.
like I always tell people in my faith, like, and we're Christian,
Right.
and it's like, you have these desires in your heart. Well, God created you, so He knows the desires that you have in your heart. He wants you to go pursue them. They're not there by accident.
Right.
And I feel like if you don't, and maybe I could be wrong, but I feel like sometimes if you don't pull the trigger and make that leap,
Mm-hmm.
and just commit, you're in a sense disobeying God, because
100%,
you
Manny. You
have
could
them in your heart.
Yeah, you could not be more on point. I think about, you mentioned the desires of your heart. Like, I've
Hmm.
prayed to God, like, Lord, I have a desire in my heart. If it's not your desire, I want you to remove it immediately, because I
Yeah.
need to know that this is not of you. Right. And so we have to remember, like, God's will, God's way, God's time. Like, those are three things.
Mm,
But with what you've said too, like, I also think sometimes, like, I feel like I'm like wandering in the wilderness, like Moses. But here's the thing: when God called Moses, He said, "Where do you want me to go?" And He said, "Just go." And like you
yeah.
mentioned, like, sometimes you're afraid and you're like, He just go. And God will either close a door, He'll put a stumbling block in your way, He'll put something there if it's time for you to turn left or turn right. But if
Yeah.
not, you keep going. And I feel like there's a great book by Mark Batterson, who's a pastor in Washington, D.C. And he says, we actually have ready, set, go in the wrong order. He said, it's go, set, ready. You go out and you
Hmm.
do something, and then you'll be set up. You'll be like, okay, I think I got this. I think this worked and this didn't. And then you're ready for the next move. And I think that's so brilliant, because we oftentimes, we're paralyzed. And as you
Hmm.
know, I mean, you're in the fitness world, right? You're in very much a physical great shape. You know that when you start using that muscle and picking up those, dumbbells to
Yeah.
curl, you get stronger and stronger. So once you do it, you're going to be like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Once you take that first step, you're going to realize it's not so bad. You have that first meeting, you make that first phone call. It's not
Hmm.
going to be that bad. You're going to screw up. And as you know, and I'm sure you can speak to this, entrepreneurship is hard. It is hard, but it is so good. And it's good, but it's so hard, right? Like, it's very reciprocal that way. And I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it definitely is something you have to be prepared. Like, this is going to be hard. Don't be like, oh, this is going to be cake and I'm just going to walk out. And don't wait until you have that certain amount of money. It's just like with getting married. You don't wait until you have everything perfect or to have the first kid. Like,
Yeah.
you just go. Think about Jeff Bezos, right?
Yeah.
He told his investors, we're going to lose money. We're going to lose a lot of money for a long time. Like, going into that, I would have been like, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, any normal person would, you'd have those worries and those fears. But to that point, why do you think that a lot of times that hesitancy or that fear paralyzes people? Because they might be super motivated, they want to be entrepreneurs, and they know what they want to do, but they don't go for it. Why do you think the fear paralyzes them, even if they're believers? Because
Yeah.
a lot of times we're like, hey, well, we got to turn to our faith. Like,
Right.
our God is all knowing, all powerful, all loving. And if
Yes.
we turn to there, He's going to give me the power. He's going to give me the energy. But
Yep.
but it still paralyzes people, and they still don't make that move. They don't make that jump to go and pursue their goals and their dreams.
Yeah. That's a great question to throw out to your audience, but I would believe, from just my friends who I've talked
Hmm.
to, we set ourselves up. We let fear paralyze us because we don't feel like we're good enough. We don't have the
Hmm.
tools, we don't have the skills, the credentials, that whatever that is. And I think that's the enemy. Personally, I believe that's the enemy, because he knows what good we can do and how many people we can help if we actually use our gifting, right, to
Yeah.
do what
Yeah.
we're divinely designed to do. And so if we just sit around and watch Netflix, you're not really a threat to the enemy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You and I
Yeah.
having this conversation and even just dropping scripture or talking about Moses, like, the enemy's like, oh, we got two of them on, not just one, but now
Hmm.
two. So that's a challenge. But for, I think, people who maybe are not Christian who are listening to this, and I think most of your audience is, but um, I think too, it's just one of those things where it's the path of least resistance. It's easier to
Hmm.
sit around and to keep your day job, if you will, to have the insurance benefits coming in, and to having some of those things that are easy. And I've questioned it. Like, maybe I should just go back and get a regular job and do this as my side hustle. And I'm like, no, there's a great statistic, and it is 90% of first-time businesses fail and 90% of second-time businesses succeed. And I think that's so brilliant, because you're most likely in that most first-time businesses are going to fail. But when you redo it and you relaunch it, and now you're like, oh, this makes sense. Oh,
Yeah.
this is how it works. Then you're higher level for success, of course. But, pushing yourself through to say, I'm going to at least try the first time.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you need to really get the gumption to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And talking about that for you. So you've been doing this since February?
Yes.
And what type of growth have you seen in yourself, and what's changed for you most in your business specifically? Because I'm sure when you started, you were super passionate, and you're like, ready to set the world on fire. Has anything changed, even though it's only been, a few
6 months.
months?
Right. For sure. One is I have become more scrappy and more resilient. And scrappy, I'm like, oh, I can figure out how to put this conversion pixel in, or, oh, I'm going to YouTube that and figure that out. Like, I've become much more resourceful. Before, I would have just been paralyzed and been like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this. Like, I've had a ministry since 2015, where I was helping girls and women get stronger, healthy, and more confident. And that kind of fell by the wayside, but so I knew how to do many of these things. I've had a social media platform, but it goes back to what your question was, which, like, what have I learned in this season? I'm much more resilient now, because in the beginning I would have just been like, no one's watching my Facebook lives and no one's liking my post. And now I'm just like, why am I doing this? Like, it's okay. If 4 people liked it, 4 people liked it. That's 4 more than I had last post, And I've just come to, like, recognize, like, that my why is bigger than my what, right? Like, I'm doing this because if I feel that God has called this and he's given me this platform now, it's like the 99 and the 1. If there's that 1 I'm going after, that's the one. And then what my business has definitely grown. Like, right now I'm at the point where, I've got a list about 5 things I have to get done yet tonight, which is not a bad thing, but people want to be on podcasts. They don't have the time to do it. And it is such a art and science, as I mentioned, that it takes time. So they're like, we'll just pay you to do it. So I've gotten a lot of clients really quickly. And so I've been very, very blessed. I'm super blessed.
Where do you see yourself developing? Like, do you have goals for the business to grow in the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years, or as far as still in the industry and still being a podcast agent, or do you want to do more than that?
Definitely do more than this. And, I always believe that you have these big God-sized dreams, again, not knowing your age, but when I was young, when I was in 7th grade, I used to watch the Rosie O'Donnell show. I don't know if you remember her, but she had a great TV show, and I've always wanted to have a TV talk show, something like that.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I've never per se wanted to have my own podcast, but I'm like, I'm just going to start a YouTube, which I've been so inspired by you, because I'm like, he's doing it. Like, this is awesome.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Yeah. Well, with this platform now, with having access to YouTube, like, anybody can have this. So I really do want to have a talk show, because I think that people, like you mentioned earlier, like, people can resonate with common people. Like, oh, wow, they have a story and they're doing it. You don't have to just be, an Oprah Winfrey or, Simon Sinek to be able to be making it. And so for me, it's really doing a talk show and then having something that is, I don't want to say global, but almost like a Joyce Meyer-esque type of ministry, where she has many different branches, the magazine, the TV show, her retreats, many, many different platforms, and being able to bring people together around that.
Yeah. Well, I think it makes it easier to impact more people if that's where your heart's at.
Yes.
Because like a big reason why I started the podcast was because, if we have 10 listeners, but one of them is like, wow, I really relate to her story. Frannie overcame this in this particular way. I never thought about that, and so that's my heart behind it, and that's why I started it. And so what do you have, like, a business verse? People have life verses. Is there a verse that you turn to for business?
Gosh, that's, I think, Psalm 16:8. Well, I will not be shaken.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I can't remember the entire verse, but I have it as a screensaver, and it says, I will not be shaken. And because you know, I don't drink, but you know, I think about a martini, shaken or stirred. I get stirred up a lot. I get stirred up, but I will not be shaken. Like I will not
Yeah.
let the enemy try to bring me, you know, he tries to bring me down on a daily basis. And you have to get this right, you know? And
Hmm.
so I think I will not be shaken is probably the number one thing. Like I will pick myself back up and be like, yep, I was knocked down, but you still didn't win, you know? So
What do you do to give us a little bit of insight into your daily routines? Is there something that you follow? Everyone gets up, brushes their teeth, takes a shower, gets ready.
yes,
But what do you do? Is there anything that kind of helps your day,
yeah.
and your energy for the day?
Sure. So when I was 21, and this all relates to your
Hmm.
question, I promise, but when I was 21, so my whole entire childhood and young adulthood, I was very heavy. I was almost 320 pounds.
Hmm.
And so when I was 21, then I went through this major weight loss. And it was during that time I would start getting up. Somebody had shared with me, you should tithe your, if you can't tithe money, tithe your time for God. And I literally was like, what? So I literally got up in the morning and I started reading scripture. And then I was like, I should start walking and doing this. And so I would walk and I would just have a note card and I would memorize scripture. And then I would walk. And so it was 5 minutes and then it was 10 minutes. And then between June of 1997 and December, I'd lost 75 pounds, Manny. And
Wow.
I was memorizing scripture. And so that has been a forever part of my day. I start my day, get up in the morning. I now devote the time, I concentrate my time on reading the word, listening to worship music. Like I have a little kind of rhythm to that. I write, you know, I
Hmm.
write, journal. And then after that, I go for a walk, run, exercise, lift weights, do a boot camp or something like that. That's always the first 2 hours of my day. So literally between 5:30 and 7:30, those are kind of what my hours, you know. I pray over who I'm going to meet. Like I prayed over our meeting today, prayed over your ministry and prayed over your business. And because I'm like, okay, how can I impact the people that I'm going to see today and anybody
Yeah.
else who comes along my path? So pray over
Yeah.
business
Well, I
meetings or
appreciate it.
client calls. Yeah.
That's
Well, you know,
awesome.
it helps you start visualizing too. I don't think we do enough of that. And
Hmm.
like, okay, what is that conversation going to be like with Manny? And, you know, just really starting to see what my day will look like, but being open to interruptions, right? Jesus was always interrupted every
Yeah.
time he performed a miracle. So
Yeah. That's so rad. What's one piece of advice you would give? Not to be, what is it called, a sexist or anything like that, but what's one piece of advice you would give a young lady looking to start a business, not knowing what she wants to do, but knowing that she wants to work for herself,
yeah.
and maybe is hesitant because of that fear?
So the first thing I would just say is pray about it. That would be the first and
Hmm.
foremost thing. And the second thing I would do is talk to trusted people, but not necessarily people in your family, because
Yeah.
your family
No.
is going to try to talk you. You're agreeing 100%,
Yeah.
because your family's going to want to keep you safe. They want to keep you doing things that give you the job and the stability. But
Hmm.
talk to people who maybe in your church circle or, you know, entrepreneurs in your, you know, spheres of influence, whether it be at work or, you know, in your neighborhood, family, you know, community, things like that, but not necessarily your mom or your dad. If there's a young female or even a male, you know, that's, you know, wisdom for
Yeah.
either one. Because I think once you start talking to someone, and especially if they are an entrepreneur, and I would encourage you, you know, the word sensei is not a person who's a martial arts instructor. It's a person who's gone before you. And, you know, talking to that person and saying, what were some of the things you experienced, or what were some of the things that you would advise me to do? Talk to 3 or 5 entrepreneurs, get their feedback, and then be like, okay, Lord, like I'm bringing this to you. I've done my part. You do your part if this is where you want me to go. And lo and behold, you will get a scripture, or you'll get a phone call, or some type of meeting will happen on Facebook where you're like, oh my gosh, sure, I want to go to that, you know, networking event.
Yeah.
And you'll get that, you know, if you really are, you know, intentionally seeking the Lord about it. So I would say that those would be my first 2 things. And the third thing is, and this comes, you know, from the very beginning, invest in yourself. Put money down, believe in yourself enough to know that you're going to learn. And it doesn't have to be a degree, but go to a networking event, spend $25 to go to something, spend, you know, $500. Not if you don't have it, don't go into debt. Dave Ramsey would hate me right now, you know, like I didn't say that, but don't go into debt over it, but put a couple $100 into, you know, going to a program or learning something. Believe in yourself enough to, you know, to know that you're worth that $500 investment or whatever it is you decide to do.
To backtrack just a little bit, what was a motivating factor for you to start losing the weight? Why that dramatic transformation at, I mean, at 21? Like, that's insane.
Yeah, it was interesting because I'm in Pennsylvania now, but I,
Hmm.
moved to Florida at the time. And I literally had no friends and no family. And so I had no one there. I moved there for a job
Hmm.
because I was a teacher and there weren't easy jobs to find. So I literally was spending my time at the pool and I looked around, Manny. Now, mind you, I was 320 pounds, like 318 my whole life. So not my whole life, but I was like, I looked around the pool and I thought, I'm the heaviest person here and I'm the youngest person here. And I
Hmm.
thought, Pennsylvania versus Florida, here where I live in Pennsylvania is very Midwest. So I thought, I really need to do something. And that was it, Manny. Cold turkey. I went to the gym, I signed up, and the trainer said to me, he said, okay, if you gain 1 pound every month for the next 5 years, you're going to be closer to 400 than you are to 300.
Hmm.
And I was like, I can gain a pound in a night. I was like, I eat a blizzard, and I gained a pound. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And it
But
just like
did that same trainer help you lose the weight? And did he have that belief in you to do it?
Gary Allenbot, if I could, he's my guardian angel.
Hmm.
He worked with me. He was a Bally's trainer at the time. He was a weightlifter, eating his chicken and his rice and his broccoli. And I was like, oh, I don't want to have to do that. He helped me. I worked with him all through the summer. So by the end of summer, I think I'd lost about 35 pounds. And too, Manny, like once you start in one direction and you start seeing success, other things started happening. I started getting, I opened myself up for relationships. I felt more confident. I felt
Hmm.
more secure. I worked at Disney, like other, as a side job during my teaching. But I started like putting myself out there more. I've always been very outgoing, but I was like, I felt more comfortable in my skin because I wasn't so concerned that people were going to see a 300-pound plus frame, that I
Hmm.
was like, oh, they're going to see me, which was a little bit vulnerable because I think I had hidden behind my body for so long. So this was actually a space of, growth for me, and vulnerability. So that was a huge, huge turning point for me. But I've been able to maintain it. I mean, I've lost, and then after the 70 pounds, so now I don't care. I'm 168 today when I weighed myself. So it's been over, 150 pounds. So, and I've been able to maintain that. And now I teach fitness classes and I do training
Okay.
and things like that to help other people.
Yeah, well, I was gonna ask you what kept you motivated, because you hear a lot of stories of people losing the weight and then they put it back on, or something happens dramatically in their life, and they go to food and they turn to food. I know for me that's a huge comfort for me.
It's interesting you say that because I've been engaged twice and I've broken up, and
Hmm.
my default there has not been food. It's been exercise because now I'm so
Hmm.
obsessed. Like I've replaced the vice with something
Yeah.
that's healthy, which can sometimes not be a good thing either. Like I was working out 2 a days. I was almost like at the gym for 3.5 hours. Like it was a little obsessive. I got down to about 150 pounds, which for my height and weight, it wasn't healthy for me.
Hmm.
So with that being said, like trying to find that balance, right, and have those boundaries in your life is really important. But yeah, I think that I've just been able to maintain it because I had an aunt who was extremely overweight. She was morbidly
Hmm.
obese. She ended up passing away. And I always saw there was a visual for me to see, like, if I don't get this in check and keep this in check, I will go down that path.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's
yeah.
awesome. I mean, I want to thank you for coming on. I really appreciate your time, and I want to give you a chance to promote uh, either your book, or if people want to reach out to you, how can they find you?
Sure. Well, I'm super excited to connect with anybody in your tribe. I know they're good people, so they can find me on, shinewithfrannie.com is my website. Of course, then all
Mhm.
social handles, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of those are Shine with Frannie. But also I'm Frannie Foltz. That will probably be in the show notes somewhere, but I would love to connect with people and just to hear their stories and, find out about them. I love hearing from people. So I've been honored to be here today.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on. Appreciate your time, and remember, guys, that everything was impossible until someone did it.